The winter wind howled across the Miller fields, the night Caleb Ward crouched beside a dying mare, his forehead pressed to its hot neck. Snow sifted in through the barn eaves, and the little lamplight trembled as if afraid to stay. His daughter, Maggie, sat on a bale, her small fingers threaded together so tightly they were white. 3 animals lost in 10 days. A cavalry contract that would pay the mortgage if the herd passed inspection in a month. God, Caleb whispered into the mare's rasping breath. If you can hear me, I don't know what to do next. Outside, a carriage wheel crunched in the packed snow. Footsteps approached the barn, and a woman's voice cut through the cold, steady and calm. Her temperature is high and the glands are swollen. I can help her if you'll let me. Before we go on, if stories about second chances and quiet bravery lift you up, please subscribe and stay to the end. This one is about how a single person with a stubborn skill changed everything for one broken farm. Now, the night everything changed at Miller Ranch. The door opened and a woman stepped in. Snow clinging to her coat, a battered leather satchel in one hand, and a small, threadbare trunk in the other. She looked small against the barn timbers, but there was a certainty in the set of her jaw that put Caleb on guard. "Who are you?" he asked, harsher than he'd meant. "Eliza Hart," she said. "The matrimonial notice said you were looking for help. Right now, though, I need to know. How long has she been ill?" 3 days. We already buried 2, Caleb said. He felt the shame when he said it, the helplessness of having watched animals die one by one. Eliza didn't wait for permission. She sank to her knees beside the mare, rolling back the animal's lip to check gums, pressing a warm cloth along the jaw. This is a glandular infection. If we don't lance and drain and isolate, it will spread. We have to act tonight. There was no arrogance, only a steadiness that came from practice. Maggie, who had been silent since the day her mother had died 2 winters ago, stood and mimed the same gentle touch Eliza used. The mare softened beneath it. "You're training?" Caleb asked, reluctant to seem grateful before certain. "My father taught me. He ran a small practice in the city and I apprenticed with him. The college wouldn't take a woman then, so I learned by doing. I have his field book." She tapped the battered journal strapped to her satchel. "If you follow my orders, we can save most of them." Orders were barked, quick and necessary. Hot water, clean cloths, a sharp blade, turpentine, brandy. Mrs. Lynn, the cook who'd worked for Caleb since his wife's funeral, appeared with steaming buckets. Eliza moved like someone who had done this 100 times. Lancing abscesses, draining, cleaning wounds with harsh-smelling solutions, and laying compresses that cooled fevered flesh. The mare thrashed once. But Caleb steadied her, and Eliza murmured to the animal in a voice low enough that it seemed meant for only them. When she finished, blood and pus dark on her sleeves, she said, "Twice daily for a week. Isolate the sick, move the healthy stock. If we act fast, you'll keep most of the herd." Caleb felt something inside him unclench. "You can stay," he heard himself say. "There's a spare room in the main house. You'll work for your keep." Eliza blinked, visibly surprised by the offer, then nodded. "I don't want charity. I'll work." She worked, through the night and until the sun lit the ridge. She taught Caleb and Mrs. Lynn how to make herbal poultices from what little they had, how to record each animal's temperature and appetite, how to watch for the subtle shift that separates recovery from decline. By dawn, the worst had broken in 2 of the animals, and the rest had been moved to the temporary paddock Eliza had organized. Maggie, who had watched most of the night from the loft, smiled, a small, fragile thing, the first Caleb had seen in 2 years. News travels fast in small valleys. By the time Caleb rode to Willow Creek for supplies, the general store was buzzing. Ward brought home a mail-order bride who claims she's a doctor. Mrs. Porter sniffed in the doorway, loud enough that the whole counter heard. "You fell for a scam." Caleb paid for what he could and left, the eyes of townsfolk like 100 small knives. He didn't care. That evening, watching Eliza at work, seeing the way Maggie's hands steadied handing over compresses, he felt a kind of gratitude that drowned out the gossip. Trouble came anyway. A man named Sterling, who owned a medical supply house in the city where Eliza's father had once bought goods, arrived in town 2 weeks later. He'd tracked her using the matrimonial agency in a paper trail. He claimed debts unpaid, alleged that Eliza had abandoned obligations by fleeing, and hinted she'd taken goods that weren't hers. He filed complaints and made a show in the post office, trying to use reputation and law as a lever to force her back. Eliza listened without flinching, her hands laced tight in her lap. "He thinks ledgers equal ownership," she said quietly. "He thinks a debt gives him claim. He doesn't understand the truth. My father taught me to heal, not to be owned." Caleb felt the old dread rise. A legal tangle could mean drawn-out bills and threats. But something happened there that Sterling hadn't counted on. The people Eliza had helped, the neighbor whose stallion she'd nursed through a cough, the older farmer whose youth she'd saved, stood up in small, steady line. Reverend Hale testified to seeing her working at all hours. Mrs. Porter, that same woman who'd scoffed, came forward awkwardly and admitted she had sent her own boy to Eliza after his pony developed a fever. One by one, the valley's people vouched for the woman who had arrived with nothing but a journal and a determined heart. Faced with witnesses and ironclad receipts Eliza had brought, notes in her father's hand, dated invoices, Sterling's claims unraveled. The county official warned him to take his complaint elsewhere. Sterling left Willow Creek that evening with his head lowered. The valley had chosen its side. When the dust settled, the cavalry inspector arrived as scheduled and inspected the herd. He turned his pen over their records, looked the horses in the eye, checked hooves and gums. Then he did what Caleb had scarcely dared hope. He extended their contract and even increased the number of mounts to be supplied. The farm was suddenly afloat in ways it hadn't been in months. Eliza's careful treatments had saved lives and bought time. Maggie began to speak in small sentences. One cold night, wrapped in her mother's old quilt, she climbed onto Eliza's lap and whispered, "Mama Eliza." The words were fragile, but real. Eliza's face broke, and Caleb felt the warmth of something that was not simply relief. It was the slow, steady rise of love, not the sudden blaze of storybook romance, but the kind that grows out of shared hardship, trust, and unglamorous fidelity. Spring crept forward the next year. Eliza set up a small clinic in the lean-to and began taking calls from neighboring farms. She taught Maggie the rudiments of animal care, showing the child how to feel for a pulse and how to soothe a panicked colt. Folks from places farther afield came with animals other veterinarians had given up on, and Eliza's reputation spread like spring green. She collected cases in that battered journal, added remedies learned from street herbalists and her father's old friends, refined poultices and techniques until her work became a small, honest craft. One autumn afternoon, as the sun slid low over the valley, Caleb found himself leaning against the stable door, watching Eliza with the attentiveness of a man who had learned to pay attention to the things that mattered. She moved through the barn cleanly and sure, teaching Maggie to braid a lead rope, laughing when the child's tongue peeked out in concentration. He thought of the night he'd prayed under his breath and what had followed. A stranger who showed up with nothing and left holding the threads of their lives together. On a crisp Christmas morning the next year, The stable lights burned warm, and the house smelled of baked bread. Caleb and Eliza stood side by side as Maggie bounded between them. And the small woman who had once walked into a storm with a satchel and a journal now ran a clinic, held a farm, and had won the quiet trust of a valley. They had married not with grand vows, but with a hand clasp and a promise to share the burdens, to face debt and winter and grief together. Love had not arrived at once. It had been built with poultices and midnight watchings, with steady hands and with someone who would not walk away. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Share in the comments a time someone unexpectedly changed your life. Sometimes the smallest acts of knowledge and courage are the ones that save everything.